One of the most important skills that you can learn as an artist is how to focus your painting. Often I see this as what separates some of the very beginning students from some of the more advanced students. Understanding what your painting is about and how to make that attention and focus so clear. And I'm going to show you step by step how I paint this scene and how I'm able to focus the viewer's attention into the middle of the painting. So the first thing that I always do is I lay in my drawing, and the drawing is so important in the scene. I need to ensure that these angles are correct, the perspective is right. So after I lay in that drawing, I'm ready to begin the painting process. And of course, I wet down the back of my paper and the front of my paper. And I'm starting with a nice wet and wet wash. And what I typically do is think about the light in the focal area first, and I start laying in those warm tones. So just a quick overview of my process. I like to paint my paintings usually in 3 washes. The first wash is a nice wet and wet wash that includes all the lightest values of my scene. And I'm letting these colors just flow into each other from one to another on the wet paper. And from there, we'll paint the middle values and then finally the darks. But now in this first wash of my painting, I'm really thinking about the light of the scene. And I want to ensure that the focus of the scene is going to be right here in the middle ground of the painting. In knowing where the light needs to be the most focused, that enables me to paint stronger around the rest of the scene. And now I'm laying in a nice wet and wet sky. And you'll notice here, I add a little more strength to the top of my sky. So this blue here is a cerulean blue. And then as I get up to the top of my sky, I use a lot more cobalt blue for that deeper, richer feeling that we need at the top of our skies. And I'm being careful here with this blue because I do want to maintain the light on this top part of the building here. So I don't want all the blue to drift down into that. So that's why I was carefully painting around that area. And I'm continuing through the scene, and that includes these figures that I've added in down here. I'm adding in some light value for the clothing and a little bit of their skin tone as well, especially for this figure that's closer to us that is going to be in the light. After my paper has dried, I'm ready to move in and start painting the large connected middle value shape. And this is one of the more challenging parts of the painting is to see those value connections between the shadows, the darker parts of the building, and all the things in this scene that unite and connect in similar values. So I'm going to start over here on the left, and I'm using my calligraphy brush and another brush here. And I'm trying to really see this as one big connected shape, painting around the light areas, trying to get all of these buildings that are in shadow in this connected shape. I'm really attempting to vary my colors, even though there aren't a lot of vibrant colors here in the scene. Notice that there's some cool, there's some warm. I'm kind of going back and forth. And this is a mixture of raw sienna, neutral tint, and lavender. And the parts that are a little more cool, I'm using more lavender and some cobalt blue. And the parts that are warmer have more raw sienna mixed into them. Now this is an important area of the painting. I'm painting the shadow side of our main spire here in the scene. But that feeling of light on the side of the building is really important to me. So I had to make sure that that line was straight and how I wanted it to be. And now I'm connecting the shadow side of the top of this spire with some of the shadows in the background over into the darker parts of this building, always looking for connections as I paint. And again, I'm continuing my mix of cool and warm. I'm going back and forth, and where the most attention is in the scene, I'm using more and more warmth. Warmth and saturation and contrast, those are the tools that we have to really draw the viewer's attention within the painting. You will notice that where the shadows are in this scene right here in the middle ground is where I'm using my warmest colors. I want that really good feeling of glow and light right in the middle of my painting. And that's one of the main ways that I can ensure that I'm drawing the viewer's attention into that part of the scene. And I'm adding a little more coolness as we get into the background shadows. And I'm painting through this figure that is in shadow here, and I'm painting around this figure that is in light. That's something helpful to remember when you're doing this, thinking about the connections and understanding that most of the time you can paint right through things that are going to be darker. I know that I'm going to add some more value to that figure in my next wash, So I can go ahead and paint right through that in this wash here. So here's another good example of this. Look how warm this wash is near this main area of interest. And as I get further down, I'm cooling it and I'm strengthening it. So that helps push the viewer's eye into the scene and ensures that this right here feels like the most important part of the painting. And I'm connecting the shadow side of that little stone pillar that comes up there right into the shadow shape here. Now I'm ready to move over into this side of the painting. And you'll notice that while I did want to paint all of this in one seamless connected way while this was still wet, sometimes that is not possible. And so it was important to me to connect all of this, but when I got over into here, I knew that edge was going to dry up a little bit, but I needed to get to some of those other things. So fortunately, so what I'm going to do here is just paint right over that. And some of this is still a little damp and this wash will connect, but that isn't always the case. You got to find the connections where you can and just keep moving forward for those times when the connections don't happen. And so I'm covering up all of this here in this wash. And I decided to add a little more value to this figure and let the figure melt into some of the shadow back here because this is still damp. So I took a darker version of that color, more cadmium orange and some neutral tint, and I'm painting the shadow side of my figure and letting that connect right in to the shadow as well. And you can see right here, some of that was not merging really well. I just took a damp brush and dragged some of that down and just helped that merge a little bit better with this wash here. Not ideal, but that will work just fine, and I'm not going to get hung up on those little problems. I'm going to stick to my plan and I'm going to keep moving forward. This right here is a look at the middle value connected shape of the scene. So we've already done so much of the heavy lifting of this painting and we're getting a great feeling of light in this scene already. Now that I've done all that heavy lifting and that work, it's time to get in the details into the scene and go ahead and finish up the painting. So I'm going to start here in the middle area of the painting and start adding my darks. And typically what I'm using for that is some neutral tint, lavender, some cobalt blue, whatever I need to create that nice thicker consistency to add the darks and details into my scene. So I'm working my way around the painting and I'm using a smaller brush, you'll notice, and this is a Escoda Perla size 12. And I like these brushes for the nice detail work in the scene because they do come to a really good point. And I'm working my way through the scene, adding in those darks and those details, adding a little bit more value to the figure, adding in a little bit of value on the figure behind. And now it's time to look at these large shapes and give them enough detail to read as buildings. And a lot of this is little dashes for windows, little bits of dark that create separate organization, bring some organization into the scene. And it's always tricky to not overwork when it comes to adding in the details. And that's really helping our light stand out as we get those darks into the scene here. And those little bits of detail, the jewelry, as Joseph Zbigniew calls it, the parts of the scene that get all the credit, these little ornate things that add some character into the painting, of which are important, but all the great artists will tell you that while these things are interesting and important and figures are great, none of that matters much if your values are off. And one of the interesting characteristics of this scene was the cobblestone road. I don't want to put a crazy amount of detail in this scene, but I do want to add some dashes and texture and create a feeling of that old road. And so that's what I'm doing here by adding some dry brush. And I worked my way through that. And that's good too. It gives our scene a few little directional lines too. Directional lines are a very useful tool to draw the viewer's eye into the scene to show you where to look and what's important. And right now we have a few lines that are bringing our eye in and pointing right here into the middle ground. So one of the very important things that I want to empower you to do as a painter, to assess your work from the beginning through to the end. It's this fine balance that we need to find of being proactive and looking at our work, taking a step back, ensuring that the values are working without getting too consumed in the details of the scene. So here in this painting, I really like how things are looking overall, but I feel like right here, my eyes are getting stuck right over here in this part of the scene. This part was too bright. There's too much attention and contrast here. And like I mentioned before, one of the main tools we have to draw attention is contrast. So if there's an area that's competing with the middle ground of the painting, if it's just too bright, if it's too distracting, I will do a wash over this area to tone that contrast down a little bit. And that really helps bring more focus to my painting. So here you can tell this is really bright. I'm going to go ahead and do a wash over this. And that little bit of difference right away ensures that I'm looking right into the painting here. Now at a glance, now when you step back, the viewer's more likely to get locked into the middle ground and all of this wonderful action that's happening here and not get so hung up on the contrast that's right on the edge of my painting. And here is a look at the final painting. And from the beginning, we focused on getting that light right into the middle of the scene, having the most contrast, the most color, the most interest right here in the middle ground. I showed you how you can tone down, you can glaze over, you can use directional lines to bring that viewer's attention and keep it right in the middle of the painting, which can really take your paintings from here to here if you can hone that skill of focusing your painting. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? You ever had that experience? Well, I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone, you could print it out, and you can take a look at these crucial planning steps before you start each painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.